Egypt's independent press protests a government crackdown amid tough prison sentences for journalists. So what makes Hosni Mubarak so nervous? Are journalists abusing their positions, or is it a case of Egypt's growing authoritarianism? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Jane Dutton. More than 15 independent and opposition newspapers in Egypt refrained from publishing on Sunday to protest what they call a government crackdown on press freedoms. The move follows the sentencing of 7 journalists last month to up to 2 years in prison on charges ranging from misquoting the justice minister to spreading rumours about the health of 79-year-old President Hosni Mubarak. Journalists say promises not to imprison for publication offences have evaporated. Ahmed Al-Kaki reports from Cairo.
It's press strike day in Egypt. At least 15 independent and opposition newspapers are absent from the newsstands. Only the pro-government ones are on sale today. Journalists are angry because 7 of their colleagues have been sentenced to jail after being found guilty for insulting and defaming the president and top government officials. According to journalists, the sentences prove nothing but the fact that the government's threshold for criticism has grown very thin. Most prominent among the condemned is Ibrahim Isa, the editor-in-chief of the independent Ad-Dustur. Isa's newspaper was shut down earlier this decade for the same reason, criticizing top government officials. Ever since Isa was given back his license, he resumed his fierce criticism of the ruling party and has crossed many red lines. Isa has already received 2 one-year prison sentences, and now he is facing a 3rd trial for charges of publishing false rumors about the president's ailing health, a very serious charge in Egypt's penal code. 3 other chief editors have been sentenced to 1 year in prison for insulting President Mubarak and his top aides: Adel Hammouda, Wael Ibrashi, and Abdel Halim Khandil. Interestingly, the defamation charges have been filed by lawyers who are members of the ruling National Democratic Party. The courts are bound to try the cases under the current controversial press law. President Mubarak had promised journalists 2 years ago that none of them will ever be jailed. They thought the press law amendment would abolish all jail sentences and replace them with heavy fines. Unfortunately for these journalists, the president's amendment applies only to 1 article out of 13 that carry prison sentences. While the government insists that being a journalist is no protection against what they perceive to be a breach of laws of propriety, journalists believe the current laws are cumbersome and violate their freedom of expression. With this current impasse, it's almost certain that the confrontation between the government and journalists will get very nasty.
It's very difficult to assess how successful this strike is. And the reason? People are not out and about. It's a public holiday. So it is difficult to assess whether they were really affected by the absence of these newspapers from the stands. But the message journalists are sending to the regime is clear. We are not tolerating sending journalists to jail anymore. Ahmed Al-Kaki, Al Jazeera, Cairo.
Well, joining our discussion today are our guests. In Cairo, Maged Botros, a member of the Policies Committee in the ruling National Democratic Party, NDP, and a political science professor at Helwan University. Also in Cairo, Hani Shukrala is an Egyptian journalist who currently works at the Al Ahram Center for Political and Strategic Studies. And in London, Abdul Bari Atwan, editor of the London-based Al-Quds Al-Arabi newspaper. Thank you all for joining us. Mr. Butros, what impact will this protest by editors and their journalists have on the government and the country as a whole?
Let's analyze the whole situation first. Number one, there is a great difference between freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, and accusing others without evidence, without clear, straightforward evidence. That's number one. Number two, the law states that journalists are not jailed for expressing their opinions. But as an ordinary citizen, any journalist if he violates the law, he is liable to penalties. I mean, he's not any other person than the ordinary citizens. That's the second thing. Thirdly, this is not a crackdown by the executive authority. The executive authority or the people who were accused of corruption, they reported those accusations to the judicial authority. The judicial authority did interrogate and investigate. That's why they have such a sentence. Nobody can comment on a sentence.
But these investigations
or a
are called freedom of the press.
Pardon?
These investigations are called freedom of the press.
Well, it's freedom of expression and opinion. But when it comes to an accusation without a clear evidence, this is a violation of the law. The law doesn't state that any person, even a journalist, would accuse anybody of corruption without a clear evidence. I mean,
let me bring in Mr. Atwan there. I mean, you're a journalist. Do you believe that these journalists abuse their positions?
Yes, I believe the journalists abused their position, but also the journalists and the governmental newspapers abused their position. They did not set a good example of actually respecting the privacy of other people. The governmental press, which is controlled by the ruling party, usually defaming their opposition, practice the worst type of character assassination, of image destruction of other people who are opposing the regime. So in both, whether the governmental press or the independent press, actually, they usually accuse people without a clear-cut evidence. And when you go to the judicial system, there is no independent judicial system in Egypt. You cannot say that the judicial system is independent, and if anybody was accused without evidence, can go to this judicial system and actually charge those people and try them. And also, I would like our colleague there to name one editor-in-chief of the governmental newspaper was accused of defamation and was jailed or actually fined. It is this kind of law is only practiced against independent journalism in order to suppress the freedom of expression. Let us be frank and let us be honest. There is no independent judicial system. There is no actually freedom of expression in Egypt. There is no actually law of libel which can determine who is wrong and who is right. And that's why we have this mess in Egypt. So
okay, Mr. Shukhrullah, do you believe that these demonstrations will be able to break the deadlock in any way?
I don't know if they will break the deadlock. What I know, I mean, let me just make a very brief comment on what the previous our guests have said. The point here is libel law. Libel laws in all democratic countries in the world do not imprison journalists. You are not imprisoned for libel. Libel incurs fines and that sort of punishment. You can so that's one point. The other point is, are these in fact cases of libel? The third point, which Mr. Boutros neglected to refer to when he was speaking about analyzing the situation, is why do we have all of a sudden, I mean, these laws have been in place for a long time, why all of a sudden do we have 5 editors-in-chief being handed down prison sentences? Why are we witnessing this explosion of cases that are being put in front of the courts and imprisonment sentences being handed down, while the president had made a very clear promise that he will change the law so that libel offenses do not incur jail sentences.
Okay, so maybe Mr. Boutros could answer those questions and also answer the question, which must be, what is the government trying to hide?
It's so simple. I mean, the opposition have been criticizing the president in person and the government in general for years. But when they cross the line between freedom of opinion, freedom of expression, into accusations and launching baseless rumors without goodwill, this will destabilize the country. Now, if you accuse me of being corrupted without reporting you, without suing you, it shows that I'm actually corrupted. That's one thing. Another aspect Mr. Hani was referring to, that journalists worldwide are not jailed. Now, in 2007, an American journalist this year, while I was there in the United States, was jailed for more than 1 year. The
not for libel.
sentence
Not for libel.
was the.
He was not jailed for libel.
Continue, please. Excuse me, sir.
Go ahead,
Let
Mr.
me continue.
Shukala.
The idea is that she was sentenced for more than 1 year just for not revealing a source, her source of information. This shows what?
Let me ask you very briefly then why President Mubarak changed his mind. In 1996, a law was passed convicting journalists for up to 2 years for defamation. In 2004, Mubarak promised to scrap that law, and he didn't. Why did he renege on that promise?
It's totally different idea, ma'am. It's totally different idea. Now, the law states that if you express your opinion, again, I'm stating this again for the second time, if you express your opinion in a square way, in a straight way, if you criticize, you cannot jail a journalist. But if you move to accusations without, if you accuse somebody
but that's a very difficult definition, isn't it? It's very subjective. Let's leave it there.
Now you are subject to another article of the law. The article of the law states that if you accuse somebody, you have to have evidence. If you don't have evidence, like any other person, regardless of whether you are a journalist or not. Now,
let's leave it there and take a short break on this because we could get embroiled in that for a long time. When we come back, we talk about the growing challenges facing Mubarak's regime. Stay with us.